To kick off his ministry, Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River by John. And at the end of his ministry, Jesus tells us that we should all have that same baptism experience. But why? What does getting dunked in water have anything at all to do with our faith in Christ? Why does he want us to do that? To answer that question, we have to dive into the story of the Jewish people. See, they were enslaved by the Egyptian nation and put to work making bricks by hand. When they didn't do it fast enough, they were whipped and they were beaten. The Jewish people were slaves. They didn't have a home to call their own, and they struggled with their identity. How does that relate to your life? If you're like most people, you live paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes you come home from work feeling more like a number than a person. Is that our identity? Sometimes we give until we can't give anymore, until we're just empty inside, and we struggle with meaning and purpose. We start to ask questions like, who am I and what am I here for? Is this all there is to life? That's the question the Jewish people asked as well. God noticed that they no longer looked at themselves as the chosen people of God, but instead saw themselves as insignificant slaves. Well, he chose to do something about it. So God sent Moses to Pharaoh to tell him to let God's people go. And it took some acts of God, like frogs raining from the sky and turning the river to blood before he did. But he did. The Israelites gathered together with Moses as their leader, and they headed out of Egypt. And as they started their escape, Pharaoh has a change of heart. He decides he's going to send his army after Israel. Without God, there was no escape. But God fought for Israel, and he parted the Red Sea. And when the Egyptian army gave chase and followed them in, God made the sea fall on them. The Egyptian army didn't stand a chance. But at the far end of the sea was the nation of Israel, the Jewish people. They came up out of the water, saved by the hand of God. This would be a day they would remember for a long time, and this would be the day that would remind them that they were God's children. They were saved twice now, once from slavery and once from death. They were God's children, all right, and they had their identity back. Their lives weren't perfect or easy. They didn't stop sinning. They still had plenty of moments of rebellion, and they wandered around for quite a while, not knowing what the future held for them. But they had a day, one day in their life that they absolutely knew God was with them. And they needed to hold on to that day to remind them that they're not just slaves, they're God's children. That's what baptism is all about. It's about coming out of the water with a new identity, solidified in Christ. You're not just an employee number on a check. You're a child of God. This doesn't mean your life gets easy or you stop sinning, but it's a day for you to look back on and a day to remember that you have a new identity in Christ Jesus. It's a day that reminds us that God's grace has been poured out on us, and we are adopted sons and daughters of the one who created the universe. That day that we come out of the water, we're able to say with certainty, just like the Israelites did before us, that we belong to God.